Now, just a warning that what we're about to talk about is a subject which listeners may find upsetting. Now, this is about a report by Sikh Women's Aid that says that the extent of hidden and rampant, these are their words, violence against women in the Sikh community has been revealed. Now, it found that 70% of women and girls had experienced domestic abuse and only a third had spoken about the incidents, with many suffering in silence. Sahdaish Powell joins us now, who's one of the co-founders of Sikh Women's Aid and also co-author of the report, which was released today. Sahdaish, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
When I first saw this report or reports of this report over the weekend, I looked across social media to see if anyone was talking about this from the usual places where I would perhaps see something like this. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you on the show was because I couldn't find anything. It was as if, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm projecting here. I don't know. It's just purely anecdotal. But I just felt as though, is this something that is so difficult to talk about? People would rather just focus, say, for instance, on what's going on with the farmers in India than to talk about something like this.
Yeah. I think, in your introduction, you talked about how hidden it is. And I think that's the issue here, is so hidden. And it's the first time that anybody's actually picked up this subject matter and done a survey. Now, we originally put the survey out because we launched Sikh Women's Aid and we wanted to ensure that our services were fit for purpose. So we thought we'll do a consultation with the community to understand the need and make sure that our services meet the needs of those community members. But then when we started getting our responses from people, and we expected probably 150, 200 people, and we would have been happy with that. But we got to 500 and we did some interim findings from the survey. It started to really having worked in the sector for 26 years, I know this is an issue. And I knew anecdotally that Sikh women were the least likely to report abuse of the South Asian women. So we were seeing women from other communities of South Asian origin, but not Sikh and Punjabi women. And I've seen that as I've been working in the sector. So when we put this out, and we wanted the evidence to show that there's a need for our service, actually we were overwhelmed with the response, and some of the statistics were we knew it was bad, but then I guess it's a case of to see it there in black and white. It even surprised us that 70% of those people that responded said that they'd experienced domestic abuse, and just to say that 13% of that 70% that reported were male, and 87% were female. So actually, this is happening to men as well.
Is it important, though, Sahdaish, to make a distinction between what may well be Punjabi cultural practices and faith, and not to mix the two? After all, the Sikh faith itself, with the concepts of Singh and Kaur, for instance, is rooted in equality, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And I think, in our report, whoever gets the chance to read it, it's on our website, they'll see that we've talked about what the faith teaches and what the consequences were for people who raped women, who sexually assaulted women. And actually, it's almost like, the faith is there, yes, and it's an outstanding faith. It promotes equality. It's, our gurus spoke about oppression and challenged oppression against women. But what's happened is that although people are following the faith, culturally some of that still exists. And that's the issue here. There's a mix of people saying, oh, yes, we're Sikh, but then from a cultural perspective, what they're practicing doesn't actually meet the faith. So this is about reminding people, what is it that our faith says? And culturally, if you're behaving in a certain way, if you are aborting, sorry to say, but aborting female fetuses, then that is actually against our faith. The highest authority in India have spoken against infanticide and feticide, yet people in our community are still practicing it. And when they know that they're pregnant with a female baby, they are having abortions. So this is about us highlighting this issue and looking to the community to say, how are we going to change this?
So just to be clear, Sahdaish, This has long been an issue in Haryana, for instance, and Punjab with with female feticide, right? This has long been an issue. What you're saying is the report says that these cultural practices are continuing amongst British-born Punjabi Sikhs?
Yes, they are. And that's what we've seen in the work that we've been doing. We are seeing this today being practiced. We are seeing women who are, some of them are being forced to have scans and then have abortions. Others are because they've already got a number of daughters and deciding that they don't want any more daughters. They want to keep trying till they have a son. And actually, even I know one of my colleagues knows somebody who in their family has had something like 7 abortions because there have been girls every single time, and she's tried again and again until she has become pregnant with a baby boy. So this is happening today, and this is happening as we speak in our British society.
And in cases such as that you've just mentioned, is it the men who are putting pressure, or are the women themselves also? Because it should be remarked upon that sometimes women themselves buy into these cultural prejudices.
And part of our report and the survey, actually, some of the questions we asked were about who the perpetrators are. And actually, although of course, husbands and wives or partners are sort of sat there at the top, the largest percentage. 19% of respondents said that their mother-in-law was their abuser.
Right.
There were also sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws, so the extended family who were also abusers within this. So yes, women are very much a part of the abuse and oppression of other women, and this is something that we have raised within the report, and there's a lot of work to do around that also.
What about alcohol, Sahdaish? Is there a link between the abuse of alcohol and violence against women in the Punjabi Sikh community?
Yeah, so we know that alcohol is, sort of a cultural part of let's say, the Punjabi community, including those who are Sikh as well. So we know that if, alcohol isn't offered, it's seen as, somebody is being rude to you and not entertaining you appropriately. And alcohol is a problem. There was a lot of people who responded. Our last question was an open question for anybody to add what they wanted to the survey. And there were a number of people who talked about alcohol in their stories to say that this was happening in our home because alcohol was an issue. Our father was an alcoholic, or I was sexually assaulted by a relative who was drunk. So I don't believe that alcohol is a cause of domestic abuse, but I do believe that it exacerbates the situation because people lose control. And I think, personally, I am concerned about the level of alcohol consumed within our community because it's, if you don't have it, people don't even want to come to your weddings if you're not serving alcohol. It's like that. So it is a massive problem, and a lot more research does need to go into this.
What about toxic masculinity then? These are terms that go across different communities without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are, if you look at certain kind of Bhangra records, for instance, this thing about the male strong warrior. Yeah. Does that play out?
Yeah, it does. What we've talked about in our report is about the way that boys and girls are treated differently, and how girls are often, because of this whole value base on women compared to men, from day dot, from their birth, many girls are living lives that are very oppressed, and that value base is not there. They're not valued as much as their brothers. This then, as they grow older, turns into this toxic masculinity where boys feel like that they are superior to girls. And that, yes, it feeds into a lot of this music. Now, the music and entertainment industry is saturated with male artists. There are a few female artists coming through now, but what they portray of women is, if you watch them, it's gold digger, it's the women that have affairs, and so on. And this is what children are hearing over and over again when they're listening to music. Either that, or it's about guns, or it's about alcohol. So those are the sort of 3 key themes of that music. And I do think that there is a lot of balance that's needed, because it's a one-sided message that young people are getting. And again, part of our recommendations in our survey is about teaching young children about healthy relationships, challenging those mindsets and those belief systems. And it's the only way that we can make change.
Where can women from the Sikh community go to get help? I mean, my understanding from the years I spent at the BBC Asia Network, and this went across religious institutions, was that gurdwaras, Sikh places of worship, were largely run by men.
Yes, and you're right, they are. And I think that's part of the difficulty, that gurdwaras don't have these conversations. And so, but what's happened, we've seen over just literally over these last few days since the report has come out, the report's launched today, sorry, the media has talked about it, and there's been, we've been in the papers talking about the report and the support that we've had backing the numbers and backing our report from professionals who are, who are leaders in our, across the board in the sector. People have started to reach out. We've had literally yesterday, we had 3 gurdwaras reach out and said, that we need help because there was an incident. Can we talk to you? So, yes, they are predominantly male-led, organisations, and there's a lot of work to do, but we have to start somewhere. And this report is the start of that journey. And we hope that more people, more commissioners will see this report and want to look more in depth into the issues, and therefore fund services like ours as well, so that women can reach out to us. I mean, we are getting calls now on a daily, weekly basis through our helpline. And we are actually volunteers doing this work. So, to do it properly and professionally, we need the funding to be able to recruit professional staff so they can do this work and provide trauma-informed services to victims.
You also need, of course, an acceptance from certain sections of the community that this is an issue. Again, my experience tells me that regardless of the community, people don't want their dirty linen washed in public.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that?
Yeah, well, that was actually exactly the term that somebody tweeted and said that, we don't want our dirty laundry aired in public. That's exactly what they said. And that's fine, that's people's opinions. But at the end of the day, we know this is happening and we know it's affecting people's lives. And we know what our faith teaches us. So we will continue to follow that. And to be honest, we're expecting a lot more people to come back and say to us, we don't want you doing this work. But actually, we've been quite surprised, which has been really, surprised that we haven't had as much backlash as what we thought we would. And actually, there's been a lot of support for this research and for our report and for the work that we're doing. Because actually, there's a lot of people from our own community saying this work needs to be done. So, yes, there are people, but we will continue to push forward with what we aim to do.
Often, though, this concept of shame, especially if you are going to report someone in your own family, often extended families living together, one house, to the police. What is the advice for women from the Sikh community who are being abused in this way, victim of domestic or sexual abuse, or indeed both, but feel that the shame that it will bring on the family is such that they won't report it?
Yeah, and that is again a narrative that we are going to try and change. There is no shame in you being abused. The shame sits with the perpetrator.
Indeed.
And that's about us raising awareness and helping families to understand not just the fact that this is the perpetrator's fault, because it is their fault, and we do need to report, because that's why perpetrators continue to do what they're doing. They hide behind this notion of shame and honour, and they know they're not going to be reported, and therefore they continue carrying out this abuse. So we need to change that narrative, and we need to educate people, and not only about reporting to the police, but to get help for those children or for those adults, because from a psychological perspective, the impact is huge, and these children need support to deal with the trauma that they've experienced. And so that's for us to educate and raise awareness. And that's another part of our work that we'll be doing.
The responders, were they British born? I mean, is this happening to a younger generation, or is this largely the kind of horrible echoes of previous generations?
So it's happening today with young people today. We're getting calls all the time from young people. I mean, they're dealing with a forced marriage case right now, a girl who's forced into a marriage by her family. And along with the forced marriage comes sexual assault and rape and so on. So this is happening to young people today. So the people who responded
this
to
is a British
the
Sikh
survey,
young woman
British Sikh
who's
young
being
woman,
forced to marry someone against her will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're trying to support her, and we're going to get her the legal support that she needs with regards to the forced marriage. But she's 23 years old. She was forced into a marriage when she was 18, and she's only just left the home and reported this to the police. So that's how we've got involved. But the people who responded were over the age of 18. So, for example, the sexual assault statistics, which again hugely high. 35% of respondents said that they'd been sexually assaulted as children. And when you look at the national average, the England and Wales crime survey talks about 7.5% of adults have been sexually assaulted. That's what they believe as children. And then our survey tells us it's 35%. Then there's something going wrong here. It's 4 times higher than the national average. And those people are obviously now grown up, and they're talking about historical abuse. But we know it's still happening today because, like I said, I work in the sector.
So are they more likely to do that if they've been through it? Therefore, it skews the numbers because the people who will respond are ones more likely to have been through it.
Right. So this was one of the reasons we were really quite careful about how the survey was circulated, because we wanted to ensure that it didn't just go to the violence against women and girls sector. We wanted to get a cross-section of people responding to the survey, because otherwise, yes, you're right, numbers can get skewed. So we sent this through so many different platforms, including things like WhatsApp, through to teaching staff, to parents, to people working in social services, but people working in the wedding industry and so on. So we sent this around to all our networks, professional people, other groups like City Sikhs that are a network of thousands of British Sikhs who are working in all different sectors. So we try to push this as wide as possible to try and get a cross-section of responses. And we believe that we managed to do that.
But I guess looking at the data would suggest, yes, you may have gone as far as you could and gone to lots of different groups, but those most willing to respond were those who had experienced these terrible events, thus skewing the numbers in a way. That could be, and this is not to denigrate the experiences of people who've been through it. Right.
Yeah, I understand. But it's the same thing. You could say that 65% of people responded and said they didn't experience it.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it from that perspective as well. But I do think, I personally, I believe I've been doing this for 26 years, and I know the statistics that are out there that people, even the report on 7.5% or 1 in 4 women experience domestic abuse. I think it's much more serious than that. And I think when you compare to national statistics, yes, it looks like it's really high, but actually when you work in this sector, the numerous people that every person I come across who hears about the work that I do says to me, oh, I experienced this in my childhood, or I experienced this in my adulthood. So my challenge to those people who put the surveys or the statistics out there is, I actually think that the situation is a lot worse than what they feel, what they portray. And across the section, this is some work that we need to do across all communities, not just in the Sikh and Punjabi community. Our survey targeted that community because there's no work like that that's been done with our community. Right. And it's also why one of our recommendations is that we want some academic research looking into this, so we get professionals to come in and do this piece of work. We've just started our journey. We've started the ball rolling. We need support from others now to sort of really get to grassroots and find out exactly what's going on.
Sahdaish, please do stay with us. Let's speak to Rachel Horman-Brown, who is a solicitor who specialises in domestic abuse cases. Rachel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Why is it important to understand the cultural context to what is happening?
Because we need to be able to respond appropriately to victims and give them what they need and recognise if particular cultures have particular difficulties in terms of disclosing why they feel that it's difficult to disclose and how we can encourage them to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to hear those stories. And I totally agree with your last speaker in terms of the vast majority of domestic abuse is never reported. I've been working in this area for over 25 years as well. And the amount of clients that I speak to as a solicitor and also people who I meet in my social life who always make disclosures to me when I tell them what I do, the vast majority of them have never reported it. And statistically, only about 20% of domestic abuse is ever reported. So it's really important that we focus in on this and look at why aren't communities reporting, why aren't women in particular coming forward, and what can we do to improve that?
As someone, Rachel, who is not from the Sikh Punjabi community, how difficult is it then to ask questions which may involve cultural background for fear of being accused of potentially being racist?
Well, this is a question that's been around for a very long time. I also deal with forced marriage cases as well. I would rather be called a racist or accused of that than not asking the question.
Indeed.
And I think, so many victims will say to me that nobody has asked them why they've been out of school for weeks and weeks at a time, for example, because of exactly that, because they're scared to ask questions in case they're perceived to be racist. And I think we've just got to, put that to one side and actually ask the appropriate questions and give these victims a chance to get safe.
How many of these issues, though, if you look at it from a cultural perspective, how many of these actually boil down to uncomfortable universal truths about the reasons why people abuse each other in this way? Mostly men abusing women, but as is always pointed out, and rightly so, women abusing men.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that this is an issue across all cultures, across all communities, across all professions and across all ages. And different sections of society and communities have particular issues within that may mean that it's more difficult for them to report things, etc. But this is something that affects everyone. And I think we need to break down that stereotype that it only happens to certain types of people who do certain types of things. I have clients who are solicitors, who are judges, who might be married to doctors, etc. This really does affect everyone, and we need to recognise that.
And I asked Sahdaish this question as well, Rachel, about alcohol and the prevalence of alcohol as a contributory factor.
Yeah. I don't believe that alcohol makes anyone become abusive. I believe that alcohol can exasperate a situation and perhaps embolden a perpetrator, but I don't believe that it creates perpetrators at all. And I think, we often hear when you're reading about domestic abuse in the press, lots and lots of different excuses for perpetrators as to why they've done what they've done. Well, he was drunk, he'd just lost his job, he was struggling with lockdown, and they are all just excuses. When you look at things like, football, for example, if England are winning, then domestic abuse goes up. If England are losing, then domestic abuse goes up. It seems to be that, domestic abuse goes up, whatever. And we need to stop making these excuses, really, and start coming down in a much more robust way in terms of tackling the perpetrators instead of making excuses for them.
What is your advice then, Rachel, for a woman from a community like this who is going through domestic sexual abuse and fears that prosecuting her own family will lead to her not only, having to go through the justice system, but also potentially losing her family and being encouraged to not talk about it? It will be sorted out within the family. I'm sure many of these scenarios you've been presented with before.
Yeah, I've heard that many times, and in my experience, very, very rarely is it ever sorted out within families. I would encourage any victim to contact a specialist service and to talk through what their options are.
What is a specialist service, Rachel, in this context?
Well, a specialist service which obviously has experience in dealing with domestic abuse rather than a generic victim service, for example.
Right.
And also, if the victim prefers, a service perhaps which specialises within having staff within their own communities, so that they do understand the particular issues faced by them. But there are always more than one option in relation to these issues. I would absolutely encourage anybody to report it to the police. But if for whatever reason they feel that isn't something they feel comfortable with at that time, there are also other options which can be explored with them. And often it's about, helping the victim to go on a journey of acceptance of, this is wrong that's happening to them. Because initially when they come to speak to you, they perhaps don't even realise that A, it's illegal, or B, that it's wrong, that this isn't something that's happening in every household in the country, because sometimes that's how they think, that's how they've been brainwashed to think. And it's helping that victim really kind of realise the situation they're in, educating them in terms of what their options are and what the likely impact of those options are, and empowering the victim to make that decision and supporting them through that journey. And I think that's a really important process that is generally left to charities and voluntary organisations to undertake, but is something that underpins, the safety of all of those victims. It's so important.
Sahdaish, what's next?
For us, it's our campaign, which is going to be raising awareness. We've launched a music video today as well as part of our conference. So we'll be spending some time during the 16 days of activism to raise awareness within the community. And then what we'll be doing is we'll start conversations with partners, with commissioners, talking to the police, talking to some of those funding agencies, because we need to try and provide support to victims who are reaching out to us, as I said. And that's our next sort of 5-year, 10-year plan, is to develop Sikh Women's Aid into a credible. I mean, the staff, the people who've set it up have all got, between us, we've got 40 years experience. But we want to be able to provide support to women from our own community, because I think that's part and parcel as to why they haven't gone to generic services. So maybe they have previously experienced some forms of racism, or they haven't felt that people have understood their situation. And so it's important to have organisations which are by and for those communities. And we want more people to reach out, and we want to see a change in our community. So that's what we'll be aiming to do. And
currently, and I know we're very early on in this, do you get the sense that community leaders, gurdwaras, the gatekeepers, as it were, are open to helping you to encourage women in the Sikh community to come forward, to say, actually, we take this seriously? Do you get a sense that it is moving in that direction?
And as I said, we've had a few emails from gurdwaras. There will always be those who won't reach out to us, but we're very victim focused. So this is not about going into the gurdwaras to do, training and stuff. That's not, if we get invited, that's great. But what we're doing is we are very much victim focused. So our work is about encouraging victims to come to us to come to us to report to us, and then we'll support them which way they need, whether that is to go to the police or down the legal services, or if it's just emotional and psychological support that they require, we will support them in whatever they need. So that's our focus. It will be victim focused. And if people want to be part of that journey, that's brilliant. It's great. And we have hope. There are a lot of people that are supporting us, a lot of men from our community who are in the police force or work in, the health and social care sector, public health and so on, who have really supported us. And hopefully they'll support us to garner those conversations further as well.
Sahdaish Pal, thank you very much indeed. One of the co-founders of Sikh Women's Aid. And also thank you very much indeed to Rachel Horman-Brown, who is a solicitor who specialises in domestic abuse. Rachel, thank you.